So we have a fantastic panel, and I have a few questions for them, but at the end, we really want to get into the audience participation and you guys asking questions and getting into some really interesting topics. So we went on well beyond our 30-minute prep call yesterday, and I think we're going to have a really interesting combo here. So how about we kick it off with our intros? So I'm going to just ask each one of the panelists to go around, talk about who you are, what you do, and really why you're here. Why do you care about the things you're designing and the things you're building? What brought you to this field? Leo, kick it off.
Sounds great. Yeah, definitely. Also, first, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to share this stage with amazing people. So thanks for that. And I have a background in biotech engineering, so I've been a geek all my life. And I really love also coding a lot since I am very young. So I started to get involved in the computational biology field, and that's what's really excites me the most, how to simulate biology with computers and decrease expenses in the lab. And I'm actually right now in Chile, so it's 10 p.m. So yeah, we're far away. And I'm now the CEO and co-founder of Protera. We are a synthetic biology company using deep learning algorithms to accelerate the discovery of new proteins and increase the accuracy of our predictions. So the whole idea is to increase the accuracy of the models. So then we need to test a small amount of proteins in the lab, right? And make things less expensive, right? That's was our first vision. But now we are really involved in to develop new food ingredients, right? To replace inefficient chemical products that are unsustainable and unhealthy, because proteins are just wonderful, right? Proteins can do everything. They sustain life. So you can do everything with proteins, and we use that ability, right, to develop new ingredients. And yeah, we are a Series A company. We have operations in Chile. We have the R&D lab here. We have a business office in San Francisco, and we have our pilot facility in France. So we're actually in the middle of the relocation, but with COVID, things are being a bit slower. Yeah. So that's from my side.
Awesome. Thanks so much for staying up tonight with us. Appreciate it. How about you, Thelonious Brian? What's going on with you?
Does it still say that? I'm sorry.
No, that's Brian Dolan. Many names.
So hi, I'm Brian Dolan. I'm a mathematician and biocyberneticist. I'm the CEO of a company called Verdant. We're a startup studio. We build and invest in artificial intelligence companies, mostly in personal health and environmental health. I have a background in AI products spanning about 25 years. I've developed about 3,000 mathematical products in my career. And I've had stints at MySpace, Yahoo, CIA. I've started several different companies. But my passion really started in grad school when I was a mathematical ecologist studying marine ecosystems. And so now I'm coming back with our latest rounds of investments. We're getting back into ecosystem analysis. So that's, for me, synthetic biology is an important part of how there's going to be a new ecology coming along. And I find that a fascinating topic. I don't have nearly the hard wet lab experience that the rest of the panel does, but I do understand a lot about systems theory and systems analytics. And so for me, this is more fun to listen to them talk about what they're doing and try to see how I can put some math against it. So I'm really glad to be here. So thanks for letting me come on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brian. Thanks a lot for being here. He's in the heat today in LA. It's pretty hot here. Hector, how about you?
Sure. I'm Hector Garcia. I'm a staff scientist in the Berkeley National Lab, and I got interested in synthetic biology very early on when I was really interested in biology, and I was interested in general questions in biology. Why does an elephant live for 90 years and a fly live for 1 year? Why are all reptiles cold-blooded? What is the design idea behind that? I was a bit disappointed initially because most of my biology classes were more descriptive. Learn how to classify this plant or this reptile here and there, and I wasn't too excited about it. However, once synthetic biology came up, I realized that you could actually engineer biology. Right? We can now finally with the tools by discovering what DNA is, which is the code of the cell, being able to manipulate it and change it, you can actually play with it. You can actually take life and understand what life is, And that's why I got excited about synthetic biology. I'm very interested in understanding, whether life is an emergent property and how to define it and bound it. And that's what got me interested in that. I was lucky enough that I could actually work on that as my day job. I'm now a staff scientist in Berkeley National Lab. I work, I'm the Deputy Vice President for Biofuels and Bioproducts in the Joint Bioenergy Institute, and I'm also a member of the Agile Biofoundry. And what we do is try to put together synthetic biology, machine learning, and automation to create cells to a specification. And I think that can tell us a lot about what life is and what it can be. So
that's awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot, Hector. Thanks a lot for being here. Michalyn, how are you?
Hi, I'm Michalyn Andrews, and I'm CEO and co-founder of Provenance Bio. We are a San Francisco-based synthetic biology company making new synthetic biology tools to essentially bust open a bioeconomy, specifically with making complex functional proteins at large scale. My background is rather different from everyone here on this panel, and originally is in entrepreneurship and fashion. And I was a fashion designer around 14, 15 years ago now, and I started thinking about making materials in the laboratory, specifically leather. And years later, as I was looking at using stem cells, I ended up talking with a bunch of different laboratories all over the United States. And I ended up partnering with one of my now co-founders of Gartner, of the Gartner Laboratory at UCSF. And what we found was that we could absolutely make leather, but what we needed was really a new synthetic biology platform, because what we needed was complex forms of collagen in order to make this product, and current synthetic biology microbial platforms wouldn't allow for these sorts of products at high efficiencies. So what we do now, we started out really with a vision to transform the luxury space, which we're still on track to do. But what we do now is really, we make a family of functional proteins, and we're working with our tools to make these products at really high efficiencies so that we can disrupt existing animal supply chains for sustainability.
That's great. Thank you so much, Michalyn. Really cool stuff that you're working on. That's kind of the segue into the first question. You guys are really building on it. This is really a question for all of you, but Leonardo and Michalyn, you guys are really deep in this field. So the first question is kind of about use cases. What is synthetic collagen doing? What could people relate to if, in terms of a product that they can buy or will be buying in the future? What are some interesting use cases, and why is that important to make it out of non-animal products? Why is it important to make this synthetically instead of from animals? How does that help us save the planet at all, or is it just like a cool lab experiment for you guys to pitch around?
Yeah, happy to jump right in, I guess, with talking about collagens. So, collagen is the most abundant protein in the animal kingdom and in the world. And so when you think about wanting to replace existing animal agriculture technologies, what we're looking to do is actually make the exact same products and offer them. And then to be able to open up opportunities for other companies working in sort of similar lanes. But to be able to really offer these exact same products, but just make them differently and find tools so that we can actually get the efficiencies where we're moving from, the demonstrations of little things in the lab and what could the future be, into how do we actually start to look at, these new synthetic biology platforms like what we do, meaning we change the structure of our production cells. So we're starting to target and design specific factories as opposed to the products that we'd be designing, if that makes sense. So for us, at the end of the day, it all comes down to, when I say tighter meaning how much input are you putting in and how much output are you getting. And so, when it comes to the things that we're doing, we're absolutely on a very clear path. And what we're working towards are those really hard bottlenecks for getting efficiency to open up the bioeconomy. So if we can change, the way that we harness animal proteins, for us, it's making the exact same proteins. I think everybody here, we're all doing different things. Some people are designing things, new de novo proteins. For us, it's biosimilars. So how can we make the exact same proteins and we just make them in a more sustainable, cruelty-free manner? And I'll just say, so for collagen, the specific cases, so leather is one thing. Leather is cross-linked collagen. But also when you think about, cultivated meat, and when you start thinking about all these other sort of products that are, come out of collagen, like gelatin, collagen is what basically allows cells to grow. So collagen plays a really interesting role also for cellular agriculture, cultivated meat, et cetera. So we look to also support these companies with the sort of complex proteins that we make now.
That's great. My question to follow up on that, on the leather side of it, how much, it seems like most cows are grown for meat purposes, right? How much is actually going to leather anyway? What's the environmental impact of leather production in general? Why should we spend time and effort and money to replace it?
That's an excellent question. And I think, on one hand, yes, leather is a byproduct of the meat industry. At least we all think so. But in reality, it's about 7% of the cow goes towards 7% of the value of the cow goes towards leather. And when you think about all of these different metrics, including the fact that all fashion house revenue is derived from leather products, is 80% of all of their revenue. So this material is the cornerstone of the luxury space. And so what I would say a few different things about this. One being the biggest issues we have to deal with leather are if we're going to start phasing out these products and people are going vegetarian, in many respects, leather has become a co-product, not just a byproduct to this meat industry. And you'll see this with a lot of the sort of vertical integration in these luxury spaces. It's very interesting. So one thing is, how are we going to, how is the luxury industry going to adopt this new transition away from animal ag? And leather plays a huge part because of its value and its role. And then I think thinking towards the future, what's interesting is if you can start to control these building blocks and build in this way, you can start to tailor, and this gets more into the de novo space, but you can start to tailor and program on a material level, and even start to program out things like tanning. This is a huge issue when it comes to sustainability in the leather space.
I actually have a question for you on that one. I don't mean to cross everybody else, but how much of the drive behind what you're trying to accomplish is sort of a moral goal of moving towards vegetarianism or sustainability, and how much of it is pushed by a real economic?
That's a great question. So I think when we started, we're definitely a purpose-driven company. There's no question about that. I think we're very interested in, what are the limits that we can push, in deep tech, so that we can figure out these solutions and support a mass transition. So we're definitely purpose-driven. But, I think for me, what was personally, I can say, what was so interesting to me was I didn't really put together the impact of animal agriculture with global warming until I got into this about 8 years ago. And when I saw those numbers, and I saw how interesting to think of, our whole Earth system as one organism, mm-hmm. And it just, to me, I eat meat transparently, and I've been vegan, I've been flexitarian. I'm pretty much flexed at this point, but I'm so inspired by the idea that technology could actually shift our consciousness in the way that we harness products, and the idea that we could shift away from having to extort life, and that would also solve so many of our other issues is fascinating to me. Just all of those pieces together. So there is a moral aspect, but on the other hand, what we're seeing is when it comes to specifically in COVID, all of these supply chains that currently use animal inputs, we're looking at far more efficient processes for these large corporations. And so also at the end of the day, when we start evaluating the true cost of these things, this is where I think it gets really interesting, this conversation is, there's a little bit of a slope that we have to get to. But when we start taking in the true cost, and these corporations are having to be transparent with their environmental footprint, suddenly also the value and the sort of need for speed in this space becomes more economically viable as well.
That's awesome. Leonardo, how about you? What's I was reading up on the company a little bit, and it sounds, and we started to talk about this, and I wanted to help us segue into the next discussion topic. But talk about, your products that you guys are putting out there. What are some other interesting things that are out on the market now or coming up, and some of the challenges of making that happen?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's really interesting for us to see, all the space of alternative proteins, but most of the companies that we saw there are taking this approach from a probably nutritional perspective, like trying to replace animal meat from or food. So we believe that proteins can actually be much more than that, right? Like functional proteins, for example, and our target is to replace all those nasty chemicals that food companies are putting right now in our food that are produced through chemical processes, right? That have a lot of byproducts. And by using our deep learning technology, we can develop new proteins that can even outperform the chemical ingredients that we are using. And specifically talking about additives, for example, right? Nobody wants additives right now because we know that they are unhealthy, right? That can, promote microbial resistance, which is a big issue, right, globally. So with proteins, we can avoid all that, right? We are developing an antifungal protein that can extend shelf life in our food products because we need to make our food system more effective, right? We are wasting way too much food, right, to make products that doesn't contain preservative, because we need to make sure that our food can be cheap from one country to another, right? To make sure that it's not waste. So what we are doing is to produce a protein that is 150 times more effective than the current chemical products that are being used. And that also brings me to the point that we can actually compete in terms of price, right? Which is a big issue in the food sector, because if you're producing an ingredient, you are competing with something that is very cheap, right? A chemical that it's cheaply produced. So what we're doing, it's our protein, it's more expensive to produce if you compare per kilo, but it's 150 times more effective. So at the end, in the dosage, we are less expensive. So we can compete with the chemical additives that are being used right now. And I think that's a very cool application. We are using this protein to extend shelf life in the bakery industry, right? Bread, to prevent mold growth. And we have seen like amazing things with our protein. It can extend shelf life more than 30 days, and the chemical additives can only extend it 12 to 13 days. So you are, extending beyond what it's being possible right now. That means you can change the whole industry, because that means you can, export products further away. And that's a big breakthrough in the industry. So I see proteins like in those crazy applications with functionality, but also are more sustainably produced. That's what we're doing.
That's really cool. And I think that people often think about just the complete replacement factor, but the additives to food and the way to extend the food and reduce that the waste in our entire food supply system is so massive and such a big saver. It's going to landfills, causing methane release, and it's just we're growing food that we literally throw into the dumpster, and that's right. That's
1/3 of the food we produce is thrown away.
Yeah, that's just nuts. So it is really interesting to think. So are we going to a future where we drink a smoothie in the morning and we're good for like 5 days and we don't have to, there's nothing else to do? I mean, if we're having this superfood that holds you over, I mean, people are really into like not eating right now in LA. So it's like a whole thing, just taking a day off of eating. I don't need to eat. What if you could just do the smoothie or just eat a salad with your sprinkled product on there?
Yeah. But are we trying to build a future where everything's optimized, or are we trying to build a future we want to live in? Right? Like, the optimal future is for us to all take cyanide right now. Like, that's from a sustainability point of view. But we want to live in this future, right?
We need to be typing on our computers at all times instead of eating. Obviously.
Yeah, I don't know if that's progress.
Yeah, I mean, texture and flavor, it's a big driving force in the food industry. I don't think we will live in a world where you will take in a smoothie with all the nutrients that you're required to live, because, texture, food, it's an experience at the end, right? So you want that texture, that flavor, those colors, right? Everything plays a role. The thing is that you can replace those ingredients with things that are more sustainable and healthy, right? And maybe you will be eating I don't know, like a preservative that also promotes something in your body that makes you live longer lives. I don't know.
That's really cool. And I think it's neat that you're not talking about rebranding all these products too. You're talking about maybe augmenting them in a way or adding to them. That, just like we're seeing with Beyond Meat and others, is that, people like burger format and just take the cow out of it. Maybe we can do that with so many other foods. That's really interesting. I mean, I think people underestimate how big of an environmental impact food production is. So that's
also,
yeah. Go ahead.
Matt, I mean, there is also in terms of products that can actually make an impact in the world is biofuels, right? I mean, if you've seen the last 3-4 years, we're reaching maximum temperatures, and a part of that is because of the greenhouse gases, of which a big part is transportation, right? And sure, we are on our way to electrify cars and a lot of transport, but there are some things we cannot electrify. I doubt you're going to see electrified planes anytime soon, because it's really hard to get to the energy density that you can get with liquid fuel, right?
Yeah,
so,
but the first maiden flight of a commercial electric plane just happened like last week, right? It did like 10 miles or something, but it was a commercial flight.
Exactly, but in terms of freight, or
freight,
long haul, long haul, that's going to be hard to do with electrified planes. I'm sure there's going to be advances there, but we're probably going to have to require high density liquid fuels for a while, right? And I think look, the people that I work with, working in machine learning, they have a lot of offers from other places, right? But one of the things that keeps them working with us is that we are trying to tackle what is maybe one of the most important problems nowadays, which is climate change, right? So I usually tell them, look, you can go to certain companies, and earn $500,000, trying to make people click on your ads, or you can get paid much less and try to solve one of the most important problems of that we're facing nowadays, right? And I think that's an important application of synthetic biology, and something we can do as a public service, right?
Yeah, that's so. So we're saying that it has applications in how we get around, what we're eating, what we're putting on our bodies. So I think that the limitations of this are, sky high. Really, we don't even know the full potential. We want to get to that more at the end. I want to talk about what people are thinking about now in terms of this, and biofuels is a great example. And kind of this is to Hector and to Brian in a significant way. How you guys are kind of the math people, let's say. I think Brian, behind you there, looks like there's just formulas on the board. That's why I envision every person that does big math to do is just have formulas on a board.
Stereotype, yes.
Why are we using AI in this field? Why are we using machine learning? Why are we using what I call big math to do synthetic biology? Why do we need it? And kind of what are the limitations here in this field? Is we talked about a little bit yesterday. Does it just make it sexier to sell to investors, or does it have a real implication for the products and how efficient they are, how great they are?
Want to go first, Brian?
Yeah, please.
No, Hector, I think you should go because you have more direct application of that.
Okay, well, I think sure, there is maybe some hype up there, and there's a lot of companies who say they do ML so they get funded. It's true, but there are some very legitimate and important applications of machine learning in synthetic biology and bioengineering. And the main reason is that we can't really predict what happens when we bioengineer a cell. We have a lot of tools to do in vivo gene editing. We can use CRISPR to change up to 10,000 or 20,000 loci in a single cell, but we don't know what those changes in DNA are gonna do to the cell. How is it gonna behave after that? We have some ideas. We can make some qualitative predictions, but we can't predict it quantitatively like we do when we modify a car or a plane, right? So, and the reason is that we don't know all the innards of the cell. We understand a big part of the metabolism, but we don't understand regulation of the cell at all. And there are many different time and space scales in a cell, so we can't really understand that from a mechanistic point of view. We don't understand every single mechanism and how, when you change the DNA, that is going to change the protein production, that is going to change the metabolite production, that is going to change how the cell behaves at large scale. We don't know that. We don't have a mechanistic understanding of that. When machine learning allows you is to take a bunch of data, lots of data, fit it into your machine learning algorithm and start making predictions on how, when you make your gene editing, the cell is going to change their titer or weight yields, and that gives you the possibility to do inverse design. That is, if I want to find this amount of production, I need to change this, and that. We're far from there right now, but we've started to show that we can really use machine learning with synthetic biology to start predicting quantitatively what is going to be the change in the phenotype of the cell. And that's why you need machine learning, because if we really want to take the time to understand all the mechanisms inside of a cell, it's going to take several generations. It's going to take a while. It's going to take several hundred years. So, and we have problems that are urgent right now. Climate change is one of them. The ability to create biomaterials is another one. So we have challenges now. So machine learning can really be that technique that allows bioengineering to be predictive, and we can do that inverse design that allows us to do things that we can't imagine right now. Biofuels, leather, food are things we can imagine right now. But being able to do that inverse design precisely, that will really catapult us to completely new possibilities that I think we'll talk about later.
Yeah, that's great. So that's really fantastic, and we talked about this, how it just creates more permutations, right, of what we need to try out, and would love to talk about next of taking those permutations. How are we going to take a lot of these test cases and turn them into real things? But Brian, you got anything to add to that?
Well, no, I think it's such an interesting field. One of the things I think Leonardo said yesterday when we were sort of chatting about this, when Hector had made the point about we cannot predict what's going to happen within a cell when we alter the DNA. I think Leonardo was the one who said it takes us 10 to 12 years to build a person who can make even a simple prediction, and we can now do it with a machine. I don't remember which one of you said that, and I thought that was a fascinating statement in terms of what's the knowledge that we can accomplish. Was that you, Leo? Did you say that, or was I don't remember?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't remember.
It was. Okay, somebody said that. I was like, that is a very clever statement. Grad school is a long time, right? Yeah. I think one of the things that is around synthetic biology, one of the things that fascinates me is sort of how it creates a different instrument in a system. And so, for instance, we're talking about bioenergy, and we have a bioenergy company that we're building right now. And we learned that in order to do bioenergy and any sort of, whether it's biochar or biopetroleum or lots of the different sort of fuels that come out of that, all the biofuels, you need a very complex curation of the chemistry that goes into the plant and a complicated curation of the mixture. So you can buy a little bit of corn stover from over here. You can buy some giant reed over there. You can buy a lot of other ag waste that is there's $50 billion worth of ag waste that's thrown away every year that could be biofuel, right? Yeah. And it's not becoming biofuel. One of those problems is because the chemical properties don't interblend very well. So you have to curate it all the way from seed up to battery, right? And so when we're looking at the synthetic biology and we're thinking, are there ways to manufacture the exact do you want to manufacture the exact proteins that we need to put into the thermochemical plants? Do we want to manufacture them, or do we want to supplement existing plants? Because when you do it with a thing like giant reed or with bamboo, you're actually sequestering carbon at the same time. So you're solving a lot of problems at once when you use a plant to do it, but maybe you could do it more directly with a synthetic protein. So we're trying to figure out all these different systems, and our particular biomass company is very focused on that. The sort of sourcing and supply chain network of how you get the blends together and how you feed back into the system. This blend works. This has too much silica. One of the things I learned recently is you come from sandy soil and it eats up the machines. I didn't know that. I'm not a farmer, right? I'm a mathematician. And so they can't take sandy soil plants because when they go to process them, it cuts down all of their, all their processing units, and their machines deteriorate too quickly. And that begs the question, do we just build that protein? Is it worth it to build the protein? Is it economic? Is it the correct way to do it? So that question is really, really fascinating to me. I have opinions on it, but I don't feel like I'm right about any of them. I'm still sort of iterating, strong opinions, weakly held.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that, and I want to reference this at the end, maybe more so, but I love the concept of, Back to the Future, when he comes back with the DeLorean from the future, he just puts an aluminum can and a banana peel in the back, and then it just runs the car. Using that waste into fuel would be so cool. Chemical recycling just is huge right now. We're just talking about that with plastics and whatnot, but it'd be really interesting to see what we can do with biofuels and all those different use cases. So,
Matt, I just wanted to add maybe two cases where we see immediate applications of specifically deep learning. that are now evident, right? So if we look at proteins are sequence of amino acids, right? And you have 20 letters, and you can change those letters, and that will determine the 3D structure of the protein. And then that 3D structure determines the functionality. So there is a whole field trying to predict just from the amino acid sequence what structure you will get, right? And with that, you can predict the functionality, but it's super difficult because, all the possibilities are just all virtually infinite. So it's really, really hard to do it deterministically. And, there is a lot of development in terms of algorithms that can predict, energy for different conformations, and you try to map like different energy landscape until you get the right structure, but it takes a lot of time, right? And right now, recently, last year, actually, Google DeepMinds, they did a breakthrough in the field with deep learning that allows to increase the accuracy of those predictions, and you can do it really, really fast, right? So then with that capability, you can predict how a certain protein will work, right? And what kind of properties you will get from there. And for example, we have people in our team, in our AI team, that is coming from a completely different field, right? Some team members, they were predicting how certain, automobiles were, designing automobiles and predicting aerodynamics, right? With deep learning, with geometric deep learning. And now we're applying the same concepts to predict protein structure. And then with that functionality and thermostability. And then with those capabilities, we develop this protein that can resist the heating process of the bakery, right? So for example, if you're baking a bread, you need to make sure that this protein will resist that process to remain active. So we have used that to develop that protein. So that's one side. And then the other immediate application is to predict toxicity, for example, of our proteins, and making sure that we can go through the regulatory process with candidates that will actually be, healthy and safe to eat. So that's something you can predict with deep learning right now. I think those are great applications that I can think of right now.
One question for you, Leonardo. Do you really need the structure? Can you do a sequence to function prediction if you have enough data? Why do you need the structure?
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good question. And we have seen a lot of new research on that field, going directly from the sequence to the functionality. I think that's the future. I definitely think that will be the future. But right now, we don't have enough data. So we need to we use deep learning to predict the structure. And then on top of that, we use other deterministic methods like molecular dynamic simulations to predict functionality, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like accelerating one side, but then still you need data to build on. But that's our goal, right? We are trying to build that databases to then directly from the sequence, you will predict any function.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really interesting. And you spoke to you mentioned the big word regulation, and that seems to be the next thing we should probably talk about is your challenge with this right now, Leonardo, and working through the process. How much do we need to think about this early stage? Like when in the process of big math to put this in my body, when does regulation even start? And when does it, what are the limitations here? Obviously, if Michalyn, we're going to put something on our body, we make sure that doesn't have we're not going to break out in rash and, be exposed to something terrible. You're putting things into people's bodies and hoping that they don't react badly to that and that it's very nutritious. And to make sure that you're not completely just BSing us and it's just like, like baking soda or something. So tell us about the regulatory process here. How does it work right now? What kind of changes do you think should be made?
Right. Yeah. So we definitely have like very clear pathways to get to regulatory approval, and I think that's something you can't skip. Right. You can't hope that your product will not be harmful. You need to demonstrate it. Right. Because all this food industry is based on trust. Right, people can destroy a product if they don't trust it. So you need to show that trust. And I think a good way to do it is through the GRAS process in US. Right, the FDA GRAS process. It's great because you make everything public. Right, you go through all the process. You demonstrate that your product it's safe. You need to do some trials, right, in vitro and in vivo to demonstrate that the product is safe. But some things that we can do is to make sure that the candidates that we are selecting are and we are starting with are safe to eat from the beginning, from the design phase. So there is hundreds of millions of protein sequences that we don't know what kind of function they have. So what we are doing is taking all those sequences from nature, right, from biology, from soy, from rice, right, and those are proteins that we have been eating from many years. So we are sure that they will not that they are safe to eat, basically, right? So we use that database to search our initial candidates, making sure that they are not toxic or allergenic. So that kind of, it doesn't accelerate the process. It's just, you have more chances, right, to finish with a product that will be approved. And then it's just a matter of time, right? It's something you need to do.
Yeah. Interesting. Michalyn,
yeah, it's a little different for us in that, I think, like I talked about yesterday, the things that we work at Provenance are making biosimilar proteins. So we're a bit, different than everybody else here in the sense that what we look to do is make the exact same proteins with, the exact same amino acid chains. And the challenge for us is how do you actually get those complex proteins with the functionality that Leonardo was talking about at a large scale with these translational modifications in the case of collagen hydroxylation. But this goes to a lot of different in a lot of different arenas. I would say when it comes to regulatory, what we see is a lot of different companies. A lot of people also choose their business model based on the regulatory hurdles, and it depends on what you're doing. But of course, you've got higher regulatory hurdles in pharma, and then you're moving into food, and then cosmetics, and then materials. So it's pretty low bar with materials, but you still want to, have that efficacy, know what the full life cycle is. Our first product, actually, though, that we're moving into now is gelatin for the pharmaceutical industry. And so the things that we can do, because even though we're not making, de novo proteins, because we're able to make these full-length proteins, we actually have an ability to tailor make products at a new level for these sort of spaces. But because they are biosimilars, it's our current understanding and the way that we're navigating this is that we actually don't have a lot of hurdles to get through on the regulatory level. We just want to make sure that the protein is pure. And so that's more in the downstream processing. Yeah. Cool.
Interesting. So so part of the regulation is just make it as similar as possible to something that already exists.
For us.
Nobody is afraid of and will probably not cause harm. Or we know what it does, right?
Yeah, it's the exact same thing, right? It's the exact same amino acids. And so, certainly when you go into the more, heavily designed space, you have all this opportunity for advanced functionality, like Leonardo was saying. In the future, you can get all these different material properties even beyond what we have right now. But for us, we're just looking at replacing exactly what we have today.
Awesome. And Michalyn, now mentioned the big keyword for the next part of our session is the future and perspectives about this. Kind of the last part of this is a brainstorm about how we're going to solve the world's problems with environmental problems, specifically with using AI and synthetic biology. So we have about 20 minutes to save the planet. And we have incredibly smart people here. I want the people to chime in. If anybody's here, I haven't seen any chats go on. Can somebody just say something?
Actually, I have some people actually writing Jamstacks and Sergio Arroyo.
Yeah, exactly.
So we had some comments over there.
Where? Maybe I'm on the wrong.
You're on backstage. You have to click on stage.
You're in backstage.
Yeah. So do I go to stage?
Yeah, click on stage in the middle, and then you should.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I was on the I blame Carlos. We're done. Okay, great. Now I'm seeing the questions. This is perfect. So that kind of brings us in. I'll read these over, but wanted to talk about the perspective stuff. We started talking about this. They started discussing this in the last panel on synthetic biology, but when you start merging these different really interesting technologies, powerful tools like AI and CRISPR, you can try out all sorts of different things. And what are those things? Why should we try them out? What kind of environmental problems could they solve? I mean, we talk about redesigning the entire economy to be more sustainable. Pretty much everything we've touched or consumed has an impact on the environment. What are the things that we should probably try to knock off first? We discussed a little bit on the biofuel side, a little bit on the ag side. What's pretty interesting to you guys on the changing people's perspective? Maybe it'll change people's perspective on CRISPR. Maybe it'll change people's perspective on GMOs, quote unquote, or otherwise, if we use these tools all at once. What do you guys think?
Well, I think one of the things that we've been working on for a while, like as a planner, really as a scientist, is working on a bioeconomy, right? A renewable bioeconomy. Right now, a lot of what we do is just linear. We take oil and fossil fuels, we burn them, and then they get accumulated. So it's like a linear chain that gets accumulated, and then nothing that is linear, and accumulates can last forever, right? So the ability, so synthetic biology and bioengineering gives us the possibility to go back to a cycle where we can actually take CO2 from the atmosphere, make it into a biomaterial or bioproduct, and then use it and then burn it back, and it remains renewable, right? Or as renewable as possible. So that's, I think, one of the main things that we can do with that. There are other maybe less impactful, but to me equally interesting things. Agriculture, making plants that can survive droughts, that can produce certain products without, that can make biofuels, without going into cells or something like that. Creating agricultural practices that are sustainable and creating plants that are adapted to certain situations is particularly interesting. But one of the things that, or biomaterials, like leather and other things, biomaterials actually grow themselves, and you can program from the genetic model, from the genetic level, genetically encoded biomaterials, that was something fascinating. But one of the things that really captures my imagination that I've been thinking a lot about, and I have one person working on this, engineering microbiomes, right? Microbiomes, out there do a lot of things for you, right? I mean, the microbiomes in our gut are a majority of our cells, and they really help us not just digesting things, but it's been shown that they have an effect on our mind. You can actually treat autism, by having the right gut microbiome, which is a surprising result, and there are many metabolites that can actually be linked to your microbial gut flora, which is surprising, right? So one of the things I think is interesting that AI can actually really make a difference is in engineering these microbiomes to a specification, right? Imagine that you could actually engineer your microbiome and put this bacteria with this bacteria all together and modify one of them to create a therapeutic drug. So you can actually treat people by treating their microbiota instead of feeding them drugs, right? Those things are a bit of science fiction right now, but they are not in the future, right? We are working on engineering microbiomes right now to convert biomass into bioproducts and biofuels. We want to do that with waste streams, but we are starting to think, how we can do it with drug therapy, right? So the ability to do that engineering of microbiome is something that is so complicated and so hard because there's so many moving parts that you can't just do it by saying like, I think if I put this gene here, this reaction there, it's going to be stable. I mean, chances are, you have like 1 in 10 billion chances of getting it right. So you're going to need a way to get the data, and crunch it to actually suggest where the DNA changes, environmental changes have to do in that microbiome for it to be stable. So that's something that I find particularly interesting, and that is we can do it right now, right? And also use the microbiome to there are companies already using microbiomes, engineered microbiomes, so plants don't need fertilizer, right? So Pivot Bio, and other companies. So
yeah,
harnessing the capabilities of engineering microbiomes, I think, can give us a lot of things to do.
Wow. Yeah, fertilizer is such a big one. If people aren't aware, it causes all these dead zones in the ocean, runs off downstream. It actually creates plankton
eutrophication.
Growth. Yeah, it dies. Yeah, and takes the oxygen out of the water and kills everything. So I'm a big hater on fertilizer. That would be a big one to replace. I didn't think about that too much.
I'm with you on that one. I'm a big hater too. I watch you kill.
You don't get down on big fertilizer enough. It's all like
fertilizers. It's another example of that linear chain. Used to be that the fertilizer was the poop of the cow that eventually became grass that went back into the cow. Now we mine phosphates. We put them into fertilizers, they run into the ocean, and then they have these eutrophication events that really eliminate all the oxygen from the water because we have these linear chains, right? So that's another example of sustainability where synthetic biology can make a difference. Right?
And maybe improve, So we're talking about improving agriculture, in a way that could maybe reduce CO2, improve its productivity, and reduce other. So it's those compounding factors all at once, right? That we can help solve climate change, we can feed people, and maybe be not causing these huge dead zones in the ocean. So I love those examples of how do we solve shoot one bullet and hit a bunch of things with it. And we need to do that at scale really, really fast to try and save the planet. What about the rest of you guys? What do you guys think on some big environmental problems we can solve with this field?
I really like the idea of new materials, and I think that's a field where specifically proteins. I'm really biased about proteins, right? That's what we really do, and that's a field where proteins can really change the kind of materials we are using and how we are producing them. But I think a key bottleneck to achieve that point is to be able to produce enough quantities of these proteins, right? You need to have those titers. So there is a lot of, I'm picking up one question here from Natalia, actually, asking about what are some of the bottlenecks, maybe not from the society, right? But a real bottleneck to produce these products is having the ability to produce it in enough quantities. But once that's solved, you can think of any kind of material. I was reading a pretty cool paper about 2 weeks ago about a protein that can self-assemble in 2-dimensional arrays, right? And so imagine materials that can heal themselves, right? Because they are proteins. If you scratch your iPhone, then you can put a solution of a protein and then it's like new again. So I think materials is definitely a field where AI and with the, designing, the capability of designing and predicting how these proteins will assemble together to form different kind of structure for material application, that's going to be huge in the future.
So what's bad about materials? We have materials right now. Why do we need to replace them with anything else? Like I have concrete. It's great. What's wrong with concrete? I'm just very sorry.
Solar panels, it's a big issue, right? Because that's something you can recycle, and it's like it's great, like it's a clean energy. But then what you will do with all those silica crystals, right, that are there? Proteins can be recycled, right? You can put a microbe that will digest the proteins at the end, so you can make more sustainable materials at the end and with functionalities. Not for concrete, probably, or maybe if you think like your buildings grow themselves, or.
Yeah. Let me tell you what's wrong with concrete. You produce tons of CO2 when making it, like tons of it. You could actually make it a sink. You could actually take CO2 from the atmosphere and make the concrete. You could make it self-repairing. So whenever there is a break, a little breach, you can actually self-repair it. You could actually. So that's two things. What else could you do with? You could make it. Those two things, for example.
Yeah.
Big enough. You have to pour it concrete, right? You have to pour concrete. What if you could actually make concrete that takes a shape? So you can actually genetically encode the structure of the concrete, so it takes a given shape. That's science fiction right now, but it is not, completely impossible, right? You can, a lot of the shapes that you see in nature out there are genetically encoded, and are there any ways you can do that in a generic way? Like, could you make concrete that grows itself, that heals itself, and takes CO2 out of the atmosphere? Because the amount of concrete that we use is significant to make a difference on the global gigaton CO2 budget, right? So those are things. Those are ways in which you could actually improve concrete. I'm not saying it's easy, but these are things we can start dreaming about, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I just want to, on that particular topic, I think there's so much interesting stuff that is out there now. Like hempcrete is concrete made with hemp fiber, right? And when you add hemp fiber to concrete, it actually becomes stronger. It does less tracking. It can be poured over wider areas, and importantly, it's lighter. Because a big problem with concrete, one of the multiple problems with concrete, is that it's heavy and it's hard to transport. So if you all concrete that you use has to be built locally, and you can't ship it from Los Angeles to New York. So when you make things lighter, shipping costs and shipping load goes down. So, but the bioconcrete and hempcrete and actually bamboo and giant reed are getting put into concrete now, and other building materials to sequester carbon actually within the building, to prevent. So it doesn't become carbon negative, but it gets closer to carbon zero when you use these biofiber enhanced concretes. Okay, I have to stop because that's another one that I really
like. It's great. This is what we're here for, to think of these. I think in the same way, I'm so intrigued by the concept that in the future, like we'll have super lightweight materials that'll help us fly planes, do the shipping, move houses. If I could pick up my house and just move it when there's like, a fire or anything, and it's a hard house and I'm good.
Regrow it.
Or regrow it. These are things that seem really ridiculous and outlandish, but the materials design side could be really cool. So growing a treehouse, would be exceptional. So I wanted to turn over to some of the questions that we received. A couple were about kind of increasing biodiversity, or how do we enhance. So this is where we get, like, let's say, a little more controversial. Okay, when we screw around with things out, and when we're making products for us, it seems fine, right? But when we're talking about trying to bring animals back that we're causing the extinction of, or try to improve the productivity or the biodiversity of a system that already exists in nature, that's where things get pretty wild. And some people think we absolutely need to try these geoengineering projects. We're in a time crunch with climate change. We need to try it all. Let's go, go, go. Other people are like, we're gonna, we have a bad history of introducing new animals into places to try and take care of a problem and create another problem. Let's talk about that for a little bit. What's the concepts here? How could we grow kelp dramatically faster and put that out in the world? Brian, I know you're a huge fan of kelp. So what are some places that it's probably less controversial? Like if we grew kelp really fast, it's already fast growing, but what are some like low hanging fruit? We just can improve biodiversity by doing one thing, mangroves, kelp. What are some places that we can store?
I would say, and this is what I've been thinking about in terms of what we look towards in the future, is that for us, if we can replace animal products, this is, half, if not more, of our uniced earth.
Yeah.
We've changed the environment of our earth to actually just be a farm at this point. And we need to rewild it in one way or another. And there's lots of different pieces of communication that need to come into that. So, for us, I think what's so interesting is, if we can actually just start to look at how we shift out some of the biggest products, and we can actually take what would be, and this all comes down to tighter, which has been a huge kind of piece this whole evening, because like Hector mentioned with biofuels, right? The biofuels was a huge thing, and still is, of course. But, when you look at the investment cycles and the excitement, again, you need to hit the tighter so that we can actually bring these products to market and change the game. So I'm really interested in a bioeconomy, both with biofuels and then also with alternative proteins, specifically for replacing animal agriculture. And then we can approach, as we look at all these supply chains and you're hitting these titers, you're moving from, 3/4 of the uniced earth to a very minuscule amount. Yeah. And suddenly we're in a completely different playing field here, where we don't have to fix everything with science, right, but we can keep on innovating towards a more exciting future,
Yeah, and I think it's super great point of let's take care of the big problems we know about and stop and we'll screw around with trying to restore things after we've stopped destroying the rainforest to make cows, and otherwise why are we doing that?
Use this technology to lower our footprint, right? That's what I think I would go into,
Yes. And I think it's so important, like what you're saying with this work, specifically with biofuels and in these spaces, because it's like you said, it's sort of there is an aspect of this which is almost public service, where it's like you actually have to keep on going towards those challenges and those bottlenecks so that you can actually meet price parity with these spaces. But I do think policy is a really huge part of this, and opening up bio and bioeconomy through policy, conversation with government, with people. I mean, this is very important right now too.
Yeah, that is fundamental. Something that a lot of people in the biofuel field has been pushing for, right? Because the thing is, it's really hard. When you are actually using fossil fuels, you're not really paying for what is going to take to actually clean that up, that CO2 you're putting out there, right?
Yeah.
So we are, as a biofuel, you're producing a product that is producing something that fossil fuels don't have it, but it doesn't count in the price, right? Mm-hmm. So there's been, so policy can actually have a surcharge on fossil fuels for that extra effort that it takes to actually clean up, that CO2 that is put there. Of course, it's incredibly controversial, right? But in the end, you're gonna have to face choices. Do you want the global temperature to grow on average more than 2 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees Celsius, or you want to pay more for your fuels, and use them more wisely? And I think that's where policy can make a difference. And we, as technologists or scientists, we can create the technology to bring that point as low as possible, to make it as easy as possible, but without policy that really accounts for that externality that is the CO2 production. There is just no way we can compete with an industry that has been there for 150 years, right? So it is the policy that has to make that difference in the end.
And because what we also see is that these industries, which are outdated, and now bio's coming into shift, they're heavily subsidized. They're actually, in many cases, failed industries without these subsidies. And so that's why this conversation is so important, you know? Yeah.
If I could with a really controversial statement right here at the last thing. David Deutsch has a lot of great things to say about this. And one of the things that Deutsch talks about in the beginning of Infinity is that Mother Nature hates you. And this notion of natural balance is a myth. And when we really study the systems, that's true. Right? Like Mother Nature is not there to protect you. It's not there to make you healthy. Man survives because we build tools and we insulate ourselves from nature, right? People could not normally live in England. So when we start to adopt that paradigm and we start thinking about like, well, do we have to preserve, and I'm not advocating this because I know I'm going to piss off a lot of people, but do we have to preserve Joshua Tree, or can we turn it into a garden? Like we could with massive terraforming of our own earth. Why? Why do we want to preserve it? Like, I know biodiversity is important, but aren't there other ways to preserve biodiversity? And with the desert greening, where we reclaim desert, I mean, Egypt was a garden, or not really a garden, but it had fertile soil 6,000 years ago. What if we turned it back into soil? But right now, to us, it looks like it should be a desert. Right. So homeostasis in the body is a myth. Homeostasis at the planet level is a myth. They're convenient sort of ideas that we have, but if we can sort of free ourselves from thinking that there's a way that we have to preserve all of these things, we don't have to only use biologically derived proteins, right? We can synthesize them. We don't have to always obey what our climate says it has to be. We've been destroying it anyway in one direction, but we can go back to trying to like reclaim massive amounts of land.
That's a very interesting question you're putting on the table. I think that's for a lot of people to actually chime in and decide. I think from the scientist point of view, what I think we can do, and synthetic biology really allows us to, is really be able to predict what's going to happen, right? Because right now you freeze something out in the ecosystem and you don't know what are the consequences of that. Can we have planetary models of climate that it says like, well, if we actually put this plant here, or these mammals here, we're going to have this impact in climate, right? Can we make this like truly predictive? So we can have a tool so the society at large can make a decision where we want. Do we want a jungle in Egypt, in the Sahara, or not? At least we'll have the possibility to make that decision in an informed way. Because I'm afraid that if we don't have the capability to make those predictions and how what we bioengineer, is going to affect the ecosystem up there, we may have some very undesirable consequences, right? So, and I think that ability to actually predict what are the ecological consequences is something that we can get out of all of this that will be fundamental for our future species on Earth.
That's huge. We're about running out of time. I just wanted to ask you guys, thank you guys, first of all, so much. In the last real, not softball questions, where can we learn more about this stuff? You guys mentioned a couple of Kiss the Ground was a cool movie about restoring soils. What are some other really interesting books or places that people that don't know a lot about this could learn more about it?
So I have a webpage, where we have a whole set of resources. I'm just putting in the chat, is qmn.lbl.gov. And if you go there to resources, over there, because we get this question a lot about synthetic biology and machine learning and so on. We've put a lot of resources there, and we have videos, articles from non-technical all the way to technical. So that is and also where to go next. So that is one. We have books too that we found interesting because I have to hire a lot of people who don't know much about synthetic biology, so we have to train them. These are the things that have worked for us, and we have, as I said, both videos, that are like a 5-minute, snapshot of synthetic biology, all the way to technical papers that we have published, right? And we try to put everything in there. So if you go to the resources sections, you can find that there.
Sweet. That's great. Thank you so much, Hector, for being here. Michalyn, how about you? What do you think?
Well, I guess yesterday we were talking about Kiss the Ground, which I just saw the other day. And that's interesting. It's interesting to contemplate and think about these are sort of questions saying, actually, we need to take this land and not rewild it. We need to actually start farming it sustainably. So I don't know, I think as far as resources around, this idea of rewilding, I feel like there's just so much different information. I don't know. I did enjoy Kiss the Ground, though, and thinking through, and this lovely thing that I think, we're just talking about with being able to predict in the future, like Hector was mentioning. That's a really nice closing to this, of what does that mean on a larger level beyond the protein sense. So I'm excited to check out what Hector just posted.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Michalyn. Thanks a lot for being here. Brian,
how about you?
Don't skip Leonardo.
Skip him. He's closing us out.
Okay, I was just saying, my strategy has been to learn as much math as I can because it's a fairly central science, and then try to keep up with these guys when they talk about stuff that's way cooler than what I do. So that's always been my resource. So if you're asking me, go learn game theory, go learn stochastic calculus, go learn probability, dynamical systems, differential equations, do that kind of stuff, and then come back and listen again when you get all these ideas on how you can model systems. And read Norbert Wiener.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Brian, for being here. Leonardo, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with Brian. We go through mostly a lot of hard technical literature, but we are trying actually to build and communicate this to people in a way that it will be easier to grasp, right, and to understand, because that's something that we're committed to do, to make sure that we're transparent with the consumers, especially in the food sector, because that's a big challenge, like how they will accept these new products. We need to educate, and as a scientist, we have that duty to do it, right? So we are building a lot of resources in our website at proterabio.com. We are planning to launch a lot of Medium posts to really explain what we are doing and how we are doing it. It's still early on, but we are committed to do it. So we'll post a lot of material there.
Thank you, especially Leonardo, for staying up so late. And thank you guys so much. This panel was awesome. I learned so much from just getting to know you guys over the last 2 days. And you guys are doing such interesting work, that is so applicable in the real world. So thank you for everything you do. And thank you for everyone for sticking around. I think the next up is it's kind of networking and hanging out. So I think that's the close, the Life Summit close too. So you guys did a great job. Hopefully you all enjoyed it on the call as well. So thank you guys.
Yeah, amazing decision. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Guys.
Thanks for the opportunity.